Inside the Pentagon is a unit with the job of identifying future threats to the United States. It reports directly to the Secretary of Defense. It recently hired experts to look into some of the implications climate change might have for national security. Newsnight has obtained a copy of their unpublished report. It warns that a dire climate scenario might be unfolding, and it's one which needs to be considered immediately.
This is very much in the spirit of thinking the unthinkable. The report that we put together for the Pentagon is an extreme scenario in the sense that most climatologists would say that this is low probability in the sense of it happening soon and as pervasively. But it is the Pentagon's job to think about, in many cases, the worst case scenario. You know, what are some of the extreme conditions that could put pressures on U.S. national security?
Rather than looking at gradual change over centuries, the Pentagon's been finding out what might happen if the climate in the northern hemisphere suddenly lurched into a big freeze. There is growing evidence to suggest this might happen, in which case Britain would become just as cold as Siberia.
Paradoxically, we could actually get colder locally while the rest of the world is warming because of the effects on the ocean circulation. And we have evidence from ice core data in Greenland and sediments at the bottom of the sea that show such changes have occurred in the past, and they have occurred on fairly short timescales, like 10 to 20 years, which is quite rapid for climate change.
The eastern United States and northern Europe are warmed by a huge Atlantic current flowing north from the tropics. It's called the Great Conveyor. As the warm current moves north, it cools, sinks, and begins to head south again. The problem is that as the Earth heats up and the Arctic glaciers melt, more fresh water is poured into the sea. That makes it less salty and less dense, and so less likely to sink. One possibility is that the circulation of the current could slow down or stop altogether.
The only real question is when, and exactly with what effects where. That is, I think that it is likely that if the climate is changing, and I think the evidence is very strong that it is, that when it changes, it will change suddenly. It'll snap. Following a period of warming, we will get a dramatic cooling. Now, what we don't really know is whether this will take 10 years, 20 years, or 50 years. The evidence is mounting that it's fairly soon, and that's why there's an interest in considering what the consequences might be in the near future.
The report says that if the ocean's conveyor does stop, average temperatures in North America could fall by up to 5 degrees, and by even more in some parts of Europe. Average rainfall in this region would fall by 30%, leading to massive droughts in key agricultural areas. Winds would increase by 15%, provoking widespread dust storms and soil loss. The Pentagon study claims that climate change could mean human life would come to be defined by war. Different regions would fight for diminishing resources.
Around the world, we could see conflict induced by the search for particularly food and water, in some cases access to energy. And as a result, either friends or allies or others may need our assistance in military ways to cope with the kind of stresses that they're having to confront.
On the River Clyde this week, a ship was being prepared for a joint British-American expedition to the Atlantic. Scientists will monitor changes in the strength and temperature of ocean currents to see if the conveyor is indeed about to turn itself off.
What we're going out to measure is the temperature and speed of the warm water flowing north in the Gulf Stream, and then the same speed and temperature of the cold water which turns southwards from the high Arctic regions. It's the balance of the temperature and the speeds of those two main currents that will tell us about the state and strength of the Atlantic circulation.
This expedition shows that the whole idea of abrupt climate change is not something that's only talked about by the policy wonks in the back rooms of the Pentagon. It is a real and potential consequence of global warming, and something which scientists at least are treating with increasing seriousness. But the Pentagon's paper says that this whole issue should be taken beyond the level of scientific debate because of its potential implications for national security. And so some groups are hoping that it will now trigger a change in policy at the White House.
Meteorologists are at a loss to explain what is causing this weather and why.
Hollywood has already decided that climate change can be made to look as scary as terrorism. This film is released in Britain in May, and there are some unmistakable references to 9/11.
virtually inaccessible.
A wall of water coming towards New York City. Everybody.
Global warming is a problem that the Pentagon should take seriously, and it's very welcome that they have commissioned a thoughtful study of the risks that global warming poses to the United States. And I think that coming from the Pentagon, a lot of people will take this seriously that might not otherwise pay attention.
It's possible to argue, of course, that rapid climate change has nothing to do with human behavior, and so there's no point in trying to stop it. But environmentalists say the Pentagon's research provides as good a case for a policy of preemption as anything else.